If we could come to order, please. Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public, and those that may also be following us on webcast. A very warm welcome to you this evening at Maidstone Town Hall for tonight's meeting of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee, 25th of June 2019. Normal housekeeping. I'm advised there are no planned fire drills, so should we hear such a thing, please follow the instruction of Mr. Nash, who is seated to my right. And I'd like to also take the opportunity to remind you that this evening's meeting will be webcast. And I would like to ask if anybody else is intending on recording. And I'm asking not to prevent you, but just so that others in the room may be aware. Councillor Mackay, you're indicating you may be recording. Yes, okay, that's noted. Everybody in the room is duly aware. And I'd also just ask that the usual courtesies of mobile phones and other such devices are all in silent mode. I'll start with agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Councillor Parfitt-Reid, I think, has sent apologies. I don't think there are any others. And that allows me to go to agenda item 2, if I could take a note of substitute members, please.
Councillor Spooner for Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you, duly noted. Agenda item 3, there are no urgent updates this evening, you'll be pleased to know. And at item 4, I would like to take a note of visiting members. If I could trouble you to come to the table with the microphone, and if there are any items you particularly would like to speak to, if you'd indicate, we'd be grateful.
Good evening, Councillor Martin Round, Head Corn Ward. I'm here to basically observe the vast majority of the items, but having said that, in my role as Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, it leads me to go through most items right until particularly item 16. For after item 16, I probably will leave, because despite the fact that I am interested in 17 and 18, I'll probably call it a day at 16, because I've been at the planning appeal since 8:30 this morning.
So observing on all items, no wish to speak on them. Thank you. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, please? No one is indicated, therefore none are noted. A similar question at item 6 relating to lobbying. Are there any disclosures for lobbying? Perhaps from time to time we've been lobbied on the Lewes neighbourhood plan. So in its broadest form, perhaps that would apply for all of us. Okay, we'll make a note of that. Councillor Wigan-Shepherd, do you want to?
Or perhaps the modern lobbying relating to the spatial planning.
And yes, perhaps. But we'll note just that one lobbying for now, but if you feel minded to clarify any further points as we go at the beginning of the item, if anything occurs. Agenda item 7, I move that all items be taken in public. We've got no yellow papers this evening. Is that agreed, members? And we can next move to item 8, which is the matter of the minutes from the meeting held on the 21st of May, circulated with the agenda pack. I trust that everybody's had due chance to read, digest and confirm. May I take those as a true copy? Thank you. I shall sign those later. Item 9, presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening. And item 10, there are no questions from members of the public this evening. Item 11, if you'd like to turn to pages 2 and 3, the committee work programme. Are there any additional matters to note from officers? And then from members, Councillor English, you were first, and then Councillor Mumford.
It's just that there does seem to me to be at least a potential overlap between the two items that haven't been confirmed, and I just wonder whether it might make more sense to take them at the same meeting. It's just an observation. So I would have thought parking outside schools and 20-mile-an-hour speed limits have at least a relationship to each other potentially.
Mr. Nash.
So since the agenda was published, I've received confirmation that the agenda item request from Councillor Pearl has been withdrawn, so that won't be featuring on the work programme.
Seemed a good idea at the time.
To add anything, Mr. Chairman?
Just a minor point, the town centre opportunity areas planning briefs, that will be reported to the September SPI rather than the July one.
With those points noted, Councillor Mumford, apologies.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. My first point is the conservation area appraisal programme. This is quite embarrassing to us. I've tried to get funding. We got funding. I've been working on it since '98. Now, an appraisal of for the people that are unaware of it, an appraisal of a conservation area is the beginning of it. It's like the emerging policy. I have got an appraisal done, but the appraisal suggests that the conservation area should be extended to be looked at in the management plan. And this item here, where it reads conservation area appraisal programme, I want to see it appraisal and management plan. That's my first point.
Yeah, that's my fault, Councillor Munford. The report, we had this discussion with the chairman and vice chairman. The report will encompass both of those points. And at least one parish wants a conservation area extended. I'm sure there's many others who want larger conservation areas. So the main point of the report is, obviously we've got a finite amount of resources. It's to prioritise what is the most important actions, be they management plans or whatever, so we can get timelines against them.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Mumford?
Yeah, I'm satisfied with that as long as management plans are considered all the way through and not just the appraisals. My second point is the Greensand Ridge ANOB. When we voted on this, etc., we got a report back that said we would be liaising with neighbouring authorities, etc. And I'm just wondering where we are with it, and I see that I'm not going to find out until next year. So I'm questioning, is there an update that can be given to this committee to see how we're progressing with neighbouring authorities with our application?
I'm sure we can provide a committee with an update before January of next year. I can tell you that we, as you alluded to, Councillor Munford, we've consulted the other districts in the Greensand Ridge and the two counties, as in Kent County and Surrey County. Yeah, and we can update you on the responses.
Thank you. I'm just wondering whether we would be able to just alter the title of that report, the conservation area one, just so that is captured and clear. Thank you. Councillor Wiggenden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to look on here when actually this scoping themes and issues is likely to come back to us. And I also note that we were likely to see our first sight of the call for sites at the end of the summer. And I'd like, they're not actually penciled in here. And I think we ought to have them penciled in so we know when to expect them.
Mr. Edgerton.
Yes, I'd take on board what Councillor de Wiggins is actually saying. There's a number of areas which I need to input into in terms of the work programme. That includes the future programme for the local plan review, including bringing back call for sites, and also indeed major consultation stages such as preferred approaches. We will also be seeking to input matters such as neighbourhood plans into the work programme, and I'll be liaising with Mr. Nash to ensure they're put on for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that'd be very useful. We can move on. Agenda item 12, reports of outside bodies. There are none this evening. And first, real item of business for the evening. Agenda item 13 is our key performance indicators 2018-19. And I'll ask Mrs. Harvey to present for us.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The report in front of members sets out the key performance indicator outturns for Q4 2018-19. There are 4 KPIs reportable to the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee for Q4. All 4 have achieved their quarterly targets and been rated green. 3 show improvement since Q4, and 2 show Q4 last year, and 2 show improvement compared to the Q3 outturn. All the performance indicators measuring processing of planning applications have performed well during Q4. This is extremely positive, as at Q4 last year, the team were dealing with a backlog of applications, and this reflects the hard work done by the team as part of the planning support implementation project. Although these PIs are not KPIs for 2019-20 going forward, the targets they are retained as indicators, and targets have been reviewed to take into account the high outturn seen this year and reflect continuous improvement. 53 affordable homes were delivered against a target of 45. At Q3, the programme had slipped slightly. However, an annual outturn of 205 affordable homes was delivered against the target of 180. This indicator has been retained as a key performance indicator for 2019-20 with a target of 180 based on the delivery programme. In November 2018, this committee put forward 2 new KPIs around enforcement. So they asked for the percentage of enforcement of priority 1 cases dealt with in time and the percentage of priority 2 cases dealt with in time. These were agreed by P&R as KPIs for 2019-20 with targets of 100% and 90% retrospectively. And I'd like to remind members that from Q1 this year, we will be producing a combined performance and budget report. And that's the end of my summary. I'll now happily take any questions. Thank you.
Before going around the room, just a quick one for me. On the enforcement cases, was it not a matter that P&R asked to actually have the total number of outstanding cases?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I'm a little short.
The KPIs that you refer to for the next year in terms of the enforcement cases and the priority 1s and priority 2s and response times, did P&R also ask for the total number of enforcement cases outstanding at any one time to be reported?
The total number of enforcement cases received within period is a KPI for next year, a quarterly KPI, yes.
That's excellent, thank you. I'll go anti-clockwise, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, actually, with regard to the KPIs that we have, would there be a possibility, as we go through the local plan review, to have a KPI on the 5-year housing supply? I know we went to a couple of briefings recently, and there was talk about the vulnerability of the 5-year land supply, given when certain developments will start, because we've got the numbers, but there can be a different profile in which they're actually delivered. And I just wondered, given how important it is to this council, whether we should actually have that as one of our main KPIs.
Okay, so the KPI set for 2019-20, the current year we're in, is agreed by Policy and Resources Committee, and it was agreed in April. If you would like new KPIs to be monitored from next financial year, we have to have your recommendations in by the end of March so that we can have those discussions with PNR. If there is a minor amendment that you want to make as you're going forward on the new KPI set, I would recommend the best place to do that would be at the Q1 report. Because if we're not already recording it now, I won't actually have a full data set for the year anyway, so we would be looking at next year. But if it's an existing KPI, something we already record, you would need to make a recommendation to the Policy and Resources Committee, and they would take the decision about whether or not to add it to the strategic KPI set.
Thank you for that explanation. Councillor English?
That's sort of anticipated my question, because I was going to, I think we do need to perhaps consider what KPIs are appropriate. And I was going to ask what the process was. So I think this committee would be wise to consider any possible tweaks or additions or deletions to KPIs here at the relevant time in our own timetable to actually be able to make any appropriate recommendations to PNR to meet with the timetable that's just been outlined. And I won't say any more about what they might be at this point, because that would be redundant.
Well, that's a fixture in our annual calendar where we do review the KPIs, having recently just done so. So, yeah, we'll make special attention to that this time around. Councillor Mumford?
My question is our affordable home KIP correct? If we go to 3.2 and you look at 3.2, we've got a target of 53 affordable homes were delivered against a target of 45, which sounds good. However, 17 of those were rented and 36 were shared ownership. Rented, we stand a lot better chance of retaining them for perpetuity. We see that what's coming forward is 19 shared ownership and only 10 rent. We have a policy of 70-30 in favour of rented. And if you look at 3.2, we're not achieving that at all. My question is the KPI correct, and is it a correct reflection of how we're doing?
Mrs. Harvey, would you like to come back on that?
Thank you, Chairman. The KPI result is correct. If members want more information on the housing delivery programme, Mr. Andrew Connors, who manages that programme, will be able to, I can certainly circulate a profiled programme to the committee about what's due to be built and what's coming through the pipeline for you. That's not a problem.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, we're not achieving the target at all. It's 70-30 in favour to rented. And if you look at those figures there, it's more or less reversed. It's 70-30 in favour of shared ownership, which we have difficulty keeping as perpetuity.
I'm just wondering if Mr. Edgerton could actually say anything about future work programme where we're going to look at affordable housing, because there's already been a member workshop related. So just how we're tackling this moving forwards, whether that would help you at all.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and I believe Councillor Mumford was at the workshop where members generally expressed concern regarding the nature, the type of affordable housing that we are delivering in the borough, and making it affordable for people, for local people. It is the case that we are meeting a target here in terms of quantum, but we are mindful of the fact that there is an issue around the type of affordable housing, and we are moving forward with a supplementary planning document, an affordable and local needs housing supplementary planning document, and that is going to seek to provide clarity to developers, to registered providers, house builders, the housing associations and agents, so that our expectations are made absolutely clear. As part of the local plan review, we'll also be undertaking a strategic housing market assessment, and that will also seek to understand what the latest requirement actually is. So there's two elements that we are undertaking at the moment, and it'll be the supplementary planning document that is proposed, which will focus on providing clarity over delivery, particularly with regard to the type of affordable housing which we're proposing. Thank you.
My last comment is we are falling far short of our target of 70-30. This report doesn't actually amplify that. It shows good news that we're exceeding the target. We do have a policy of 70-30 split, which we are not achieving.
Just so I can clarify to members, there is a KPI for this coming year that you will receive, which is percentage of affordable homes delivered as a percentage of all net housing in the borough. So you will be getting a bit more of an idea about the proportions in that. At the moment, the affordable homes definition covers the social rented stuff, which is why that's all together. But as I said, you will get a proportional PI on affordable homes as a total of all homes in the borough delivered for quarter one, probably. Yeah.
Would I be right to say that CHE also monitor that in a little bit more detail?
I'm not entirely certain, but yeah, it would fall under their homes and communities, and yeah, it would go to both committees. We would send that to both.
So I think that was useful to flag that up, Councillor Mumford, and I think we can take some reassurance that it is in our work stream to scrutinise what we need to do differently to achieve that balance, if indeed that's the correct balance moving forwards. Councillor Wiggenden?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to come back on something that Councillor Clark was saying earlier on about asking to have in the KPIs our 5-year housing land supply. And I remember this is something that we discussed quite a lot a number of years ago. And I remember Mr. Jarman was saying actually it was a labour-intensive task, but actually done once a year. So we set it because I know myself and Councillor Springer certainly were bringing it up before, and there were lots of reasons why it was done once a year, and that was a benchmark against which we were set, and therefore trying to estimate it more regularly was actually not helpful to us, and I just want to get some kind of answer.
Yeah, that is the case, yeah. It's an annualised figure based on the business year. So when the 1st of April comes, agents like those sitting in front of us will start saying, when are you going to produce your housing delivery figures for the previous business year? But as you said, Councillor de Wigan-Dean, it's labour intensive, and once you've got the primary data, then you have to analyse it in order to put it in an understandable form, and it takes time.
Mr. Egerton, would you like to contribute further?
Just a very brief follow-up, Chairman. Absolutely correct in terms of Mr. Jarman's advice, and I would also add that we do of course have the authority monitoring report, which is produced on an annual basis to reflect exactly what Mr. Jarman's saying, quite a labour intensive process of calculating our 5-year supply, whether we're achieving the delivery tests and so forth, but it's considered in the round in the authority monitoring report, which is produced by the end of each year. Thank you.
Thank you. Final say from Councillor Clark.
I totally understand it's labour intensive, but I think a KPI is how we judge what we're doing to how we set a target. And I think that, yes, okay, we're going to do a labour intensive process every year, but we need to see where we are in terms of where we want to be. And I think when we talked about this several years ago, as mentioned, I think I did actually say this should be one of William's KPIs. I'm not sure if it actually made it to that. That was just a comment in passing. But I think we should judge ourselves. I think we should be looking at how we're performing, because if we lose the 5-year housing supply, it's one thing just to have it in a report and that we look around and we note the report, but I think we should be judged against how we achieve the 5-year housing supply.
If there are no further comments or questions, we're simply asked to note the outturn of these KPIs. So is that noted, members? And then, notwithstanding that the devil is in the detail, as Councillor Mumford has quite rightly pointed out, I think we should actually also place on record that these KPIs are an excellent turnout and thank officers accordingly. Is that agreed? Thank you. So next to agenda item 14, which is the fourth quarter budget monitoring. Mr. Hartgrove.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the fourth and final budget update to the committee for the 2018-19 financial year. The figures in the report reflect the outturn for the services covered by this committee, although they remain provisional until the completion of the external audit. And the actual, coincidentally, the external auditors are on site as we speak. Turning to the revenue outturn, then Appendix 1, page 23, sets out the position on the revenue budget, showing a net underspend of £54,000 for the year, and that's following a carry forward of £70,000 in unspent grants, in other words, a total variance of £124,000. Significant variances, those that deviate from budget by more than £30,000 or more, are summarised and explained in pages 24 and 25. Most variances are positive, including the development control advice. A budget surplus of £145,000 has been achieved due to additional income from pre-planning applications advice and also the new planning performance agreements. Planning policy budget then, underspent by £123,000 due to a number of underspent and unused budgets from various professional service related budgets, consultancy, legal advice, that sort of thing. And the other significant positive variance, pay and display car parks budget. Although income was actually £146,000 below budget in the financial year, this was outweighed by the combined impact of additional revenue from season tickets of £43,000 and the use of reserves of £165,000 that were actually generated in 2017-18. Some variances are negative though, including development control majors with a budget shortfall of £294,000. There's been a significant reduction in major planning applications this year, leading to a shortfall in fees. On the development management section budget, that was overspent by £137,000, and that was due to the incurrence of additional agency staff costs required to cover the post of the former major projects manager and also another staff member during maternity leave. And finally, on Park and Ride, the income generated from that scheme was £104,000 below budget, as scheme usage was not quite as high as previously hoped. The scheme has changed from 2019-20 with the expectation that the costs of the council will reduce. Turning to capital then, Appendix 1, page 27, sets out the position on the capital programme. It's a fairly simple programme comprising just the Riverside towpath and the bridges gyratory schemes. At the year end, 67,000 or 29% of the total budget of, the revised budget should I say, of 228,000 had been spent, and the balance of 161,000 rolls forward to 2019-18 to continue to fund those projects. Finally, Appendix 2 to the report, I just draw your attention to the local plan review. Members of the committee may recall that the Council's medium-term financial plan includes provision for resources of £800,000 to be spent over the period 2017-18 to 21-22 to fund the local plan review. So far, none of that provision has been used. However, Appendix 2, pages 28 to 29, summarise the work that is due to be undertaken and funded from the provision. That's it, Chairman. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. like to just update the committee in a minor way. The matter of the capital spend on the towpath works, which included the final piece of the flood defences in the Medway Street subway, that matter is still outstanding. I think there are some final designs that are for approval, but just to reassure you that I continue to liaise with the directors as you'd asked me to do so, to make sure that that work is progressing. And you know, I am pressing hard that we actually do see a final outcome there. The other thing I'd like to say is that on the matter of the projected costs, you may recall that we'd actually, for the local plan, you may recall that we'd asked for some high-level detail to show that there is adequate resourcing to see us through the process. And I think this paper in front of us is confirming that at this stage we do seem to have the resources. I see Councillor Clark is indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. With the adverse variance for development control, with the reduced number of planning applications, would you be able to comment on whether you are aware of the profile? Clearly, we've got a lot more available under permitted development, but do we know how much of this may have been through conversions of offices in the town centre?
Obviously, we don't get a fee for the prior notifications, but I've discussed this many a time with the chair and vice chair. It's what I call a mature stage in the development cycle. So our local plan got adopted in October 2017. So obviously house builders aren't putting in lots of major applications. And I think I say this every time there's a financial report in front of us. It's an adverse variance compared to what the estimate was. Personally, I think, given that we're at such a mature stage, I mean, things will change as the local plan review starts taking off. The applications will start coming in again. That's the nature of the development cycle. But if you leave the estimate to one side, which was over 1 million, I think it's actually more than I expected. But the way to do projections is, first and foremost, you look at all your allocated sites and you work out where you are with the allocated sites.
Do you have a view as to how the profile fits outside of the local plan sites, in terms of sites that can be done under permitted development and the opportunity costs that they would have had?
I think we know through I've seen draft figures for housing delivery for last business year, and yes, the office to resi permitted development did make a very significant contribution. So based on per unit, yes. We probably lost income of certainly over 10,000, I would have thought.
I think the question that it really raises is why the target was so high, given we knew what stage we were with the local plan, because the only gap could have been significant unexpected windfall that, given we had a plan with some detail, wasn't expected. So I think...
And sorry, yeah, thank you, Chairman. Sorry to convolute it even more. The permitted development, as in the prior notifications, were known to us because, contrary to popular belief, these things don't happen overnight. So we knew that we weren't getting income, for instance, from the conversion of Kent House into residential, because the prior notification was in the previous business year. So we wouldn't have forecast, that shouldn't have been in the forecast.
But that would have an impact on our costs, not our income. Yeah. Yes. If you're finished, Councillor Clark, I'll move on to Councillor English.
Yes, to continue the point, I mean, I remember I had a long discussion on a related point on the estimates about street naming and numbering, where I said it was far too low and it's coming much nearer the figure I had in mind. I do think that we have to be wary of just plucking figures out of the air, which I don't think anyone in this room did, but I know it did, to actually make the revenue budget stack up for a year just because it's a nice round figure to make the budget balance. Frankly, that was never a realistic figure. And the fact that it's coming short should not be a surprise. We really, well, have to be a little more sceptical with some of the figures that we see in front of us on both sides of the equation. And as I said, that figure didn't originate from anyone in this room, but
I think such things were said. We just need to make sure that P&R listen next time. Councillor Mackay.
Does this go down as my maiden comment? I suppose it does. Without trying to labour the point, development control majors, what is the budget for 1920?
I don't know if we have that to...
know that off the top of my head. I'm happy to feed that back if that's... That was set back in February, so...
The figure is known and is set, it's just we do not have it available to us this evening. You'll recall when you supported the budget in full council, it was in the papers.
Yeah, I can't remember it either.
No, good. Councillor de Wiggendon.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to ask, we do have a positive variance for development control advice. I'd just like to ask Mr. Jones to comment on the uptake of PPAs. Obviously, we're hoping that's going to develop quite nicely. I just want a brief comment on how you think that's going.
Yeah, that's been very positive. The developers, in particular, like having at least one meeting with people like yourself, actually, so they can, shape their proposal.
Useful to be reminded that your time is sold. I'll refrain from commenting on such things, but there is a question by way of the accounting I would like to ask. So we show the income for the PPAs and other fees. Do we actually accrue the cost, or do we release the income into the accounts over time?
The two match each other, so we do actually accrue. We didn't used to do that. That's something that was developed this year, but can't remember the exact timings of it now. Rob might be able to help me, but obviously the minor planning applications, the income is recognised over a shorter time period. Is it 13 weeks? I think it is. What was the cut-off point? Something like 13 weeks. 13 weeks for majors. Yeah. So anything over 13 weeks would be classified as a major, and the income would be recognised over a longer period of time. So there'll be an accrual at the year end, anything that rolls over into the year. And there's also there is one major at the moment in progress, which is more than 13 weeks. Is about 20. How many weeks is that?
That's subject to It's the bin recall. Yeah.
So in answer to your question, expenditure is matched against income now. So
The reason I've flagged that up, members, is just so that when we're in that budget review mode, that we are actually understanding some of these exceptional income numbers. We may not be seeing the costs immediately, but we're reassured that they are now budgeted by accrual or recognised by accrual. Councillor Mackay, did you want to go again? No. So on page 12, we are asked to note threefold: the financial performance, the slippage in the capital programme and the projected costs for the local plan review. Is that noted, members? Thank you. Now, I am just wondering if the sound in here is a bit low this evening, so we may need to pause for a moment while Mr. Nash just sees if he can tweak the volume. So it's been turned up a little bit. That seems marginally better to me. Can you all hear now? Councillor Clark.
Testing, testing.
Okay, well, we'll see how we get on with that. But if the sound is a further difficulty, then perhaps you could at least raise it before the evening's out so that further work can be done on the system at another time if it's needed. Agenda item 15, Maidstone Borough Local Plan, duty to cooperate. Mr. Ball, could you help us with this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report covers the duty to cooperate and statement of common ground that accompany the local plan review. The duty to cooperate is a statutory part of local plan preparation. It requires that local authorities cooperate in the preparation of creating new local plans, particularly with regard to strategic matters which don't necessarily end or begin at borough boundaries. The Statement of Common Ground is a document that will emerge alongside the local plan review process, which will evidence the Council's undertakings in regards carrying out the duty to cooperate. The report before you sets out who, how and when cross-boundary authorities will be engaged in duty to cooperate proceedings. It's based on issues from the local planning, the local plan review, scoping, themes and issues consultation document, which is the next item on the agenda. It's important to note this is just the start of this process. Members, and it will evolve as the local plan review evolves and issues become more flourish as we go through the process. Members are asked to note the proposed set of cross-boundary issues and engagement activities as set out in Appendix A of this report.
Thank you for your introduction. Councillor Garton.
Just a minor point, Mr. Chairman. 1.13, February 19. Am I right in presuming that that is a typo? It should be February 2020.
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask a little bit more about the statements of common ground? These will be documents that will be signed, and could you clarify us for who is authorised to sign them?
Thank you, Chairman. The authority in this regard would be to the Head of Planning and Development to sign these off. They are fairly fluid documents and are produced fairly quickly, but they are updated. It's almost like a filtering exercise. The granularity, the detail within them grows over time as more information, more evidence, more understanding is achieved between authority. But the authority is with the Head of Planning and Development.
I think is it 8.1 in the Constitution? I can't remember. But the way I read it, it's different to how you're explaining it. And I'm not wholly convinced that it's a delegated authority to sign the statements of common ground. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right, but I would like a more meaningful assurance on this matter. And I'm not sure how we progress this. I've previously discussed this with Head of Planning. Councillor English is nodding his head, but I would like cast iron assurance that the authority for statements of common ground is covered in the scheme of delegation, because I'm not currently convinced. And these are very significant documents. I remember in the run-up to the examination of our last local plan, there was suddenly a whole host of these things came into life that had never ever been anywhere near a committee. And they're significant documents when it gets to that stage. So if I could seek some assurance on that, if not tonight, then perhaps we need it brought on another occasion. Councillor de Wickerden.
My question is, as you were saying, it's these documents start quite broad and then become increasingly granular. So, is it the expectation that things will go very smoothly? Or are they going to increasingly become a bone of contention between authorities? I mean, are we expecting that this will become a major obstacle to getting something resolved at the end of the day?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, a very, very good point. The thing to remember, I think, with statements of common ground is that they are not we don't have this sort of duty to agree in that regard. What we do have is almost a requirement to map out those areas where we do agree, but also those areas where we disagree. So the statement of common ground itself won't end up being an obstacle, or it shouldn't end up being an obstacle. What it will do, though, is make it very clear where the relevant authorities agree and disagree. And that information, as the granularity emerges, will become more and more important, up to and then including the examination of the local plan review, whereby the independent inspector will examine those statements of common ground and will likely probe those areas, particularly of disagreement between the authorities.
I think our legal officer is reading relevant pieces of constitution as we speak. Is it possible that you can give us a definitive on this evening, or could we ask you for a statement on another occasion?
I'll have a look at it, yeah.
Okay, I'm assuming you would like that, members. Yes? Okay. So, Mr. Nash, will you add that into our work programme? It only need be a short item. Right, let's go back to what we need to do here. Sorry, Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes, I am. I agree with the chairman. When I read through this, I do think there needs to be some kind of protocol about authorisation. But the other thing, looking at possible areas of disagreement, I think it's going to be quite important that there are accurate minute taking, and there's nothing said on this about minutes. Can you just tell me that that will happen and whose responsibility it will be, please?
Yes, thank you very much for that, Councillor. It's something which I think saw quite a large amount of scrutiny, actually, in the examination of the adopted local plan. And I know it's a concern to members as well. We will be seeking to take minutes of the meetings which we have with adjoining authorities and other authorities affected by the duty to cooperate, with the idea of publishing those as part of our requirements under the Statements of Common Ground. So we will make that information publicly available.
That's very reassuring to hear, thank you. So we're asked to note this evening, is it noted, members? And yes, the addition to the work programme that we've already made. Right, moving on, we're doing well. Agenda item 16. Maidstone Local Plan Review, Scoping, Themes and Issues Consultation Document, Regulation 18A. Mrs. Lee.
Thank you and good evening, members. This document represents the first stage of consultation on the local plan, and the regulations require us to ask public interested parties what issues the local plan review should cover. So this document is exactly aimed at that purpose. So we're literally asking about the scope of the local plan review and bringing it before you this evening means we can, subject to your decision, keep to our timetable to go out to public consultation in July, on the 19th of July. That fits with our timetable agreed in the local development scheme a year ago. The main consultation documents in Appendix A of your papers, it's 90-odd pages, and just to give you an overview, and very much linked to its purpose, that it's inviting comments on the scope of the local plan. Its approach is to set out issues and possible considerations, but it doesn't, and importantly, it doesn't at this stage reach any conclusions. It sets out enough background so that people looking at the document and responding to it have enough information to make informed responses, but we're not at this point saying or directing what we think the policy direction of the local plan review should be. And that's because there's a lot more information to come, not least the consultation responses we're going to get, but also the ongoing collection of evidence that's taking place currently, which will all inform future decisions coming early next year as we start to shape what the local plan review's content should be. There's questions throughout the document, and in line with that scoping stage, they're open questions. They're not ones where it's just a yes/no answer, that we're inviting people to make comments and observations and their thoughts on the key content of the local plan review. The covering report explains some particular framing influences on the document as it stands, and very significant and sort of highlighted throughout the document is the strategic plan that you as members have agreed, that very much sets the direction of travel for the council for the long term, actually to 2045, and we very much sought to embed the priorities and outcomes from that strategic plan within the document so you can clearly see how they're interrelated. Obviously, the local plan, adopted local plan, the inspector required us to include a policy that committed us to reviewing the plan and set out clearly in policy LPR1 the matters or certain matters that we should consider as part of that review. And then the third particular framing influence is the context provided by the government through the National Planning Policy Framework and the associated guidance. And reiterated in the document, and I know members are aware, is the extent to which the planning system in Britain is a top-down system. Very much we get a clear steer from the government in terms of the matters we need to deal with and the way we need to deal with them. And so it's important, again, for the context for people responding to this consultation, that is set out. The main content of the document is the technical content is split. We've got a section, quite a lengthy section that talks about growth. Obviously, that's quite the headline issue really for the local plan review. And again, we're providing background on the types of development we're going to need to plan for: housing, economic development, retail, and such like. Where we know about it, the amount of development we need to plan for. Obviously, for housing, we have that figure. For other uses, we don't have that just yet. Talk about the types of sites we might need to consider, and also very importantly, we talk about the quality of development, which again we know is a particular issue for local residents. It's not just about delivering the numbers; it's delivering about the right type and quality of development as well. And that section on growth includes some initial spatial options, 3 options. These aren't site-specific or location-specific generally at this point, but they, again, are a first pass at the way new development could be distributed across the borough, and we're seeking to get early feedback on those options, whether they're the right ones, whether people have more refined options to suggest at this time. Then there's a bit more meat in the document in terms of technical areas. There's 15 in total, which deal with the sort of the full remit of housing, employment, environmental issues, infrastructure, and infrastructure in particular is given quite major attention in the document. And broadly, these sections, as I've said, try to set the scene, give people information on what the national policy requirements are. Where possible, we suggest measures that might be employed without dictating at this point what choices we might want to make. And then at the end of each section, we include sort of an open consultation question. Obviously, in parallel, we're planning to, subject to your agreement, go out to consultation in July and for a 10-week period. But it's not, during that consultation period, it's not that other work on the local plan review will cease. And in parallel, we're progressing the evidence base for the local plan review, which obviously will give you members more refined information into next year as you're starting to make decisions about the direction of the plan. So the economic needs study and retail needs study is underway. Earlier mentioned this evening, the strategic housing market assessment. And as you're very aware, the call for sites has now finished, and over the summer into the autumn, we'll be assessing the sites that have been submitted through that process. Just to complete on the suite of documents you've got in front of you, Appendix B, I think, is the summary document. It's on pages 142 to 150, so that's a slightly more bite-sized version of the consultation document to give people the headlines if they don't want to wade through the totality of the technical document. The recommendation to you this evening, members, is to agree the content of the technical document and the summary document, but also to ask for delegated authority to the Head of Planning and Development to basically finalise the presentation of the documents so we can get them printed to hit that deadline of the 19th of July to start the consultation. And we've given a sample in the final appendix of the graphical approach that we propose to take. We can put it up on the screen if you not want to interrogate it in colour. But fundamentally, we've carried through the colour scheme from the strategic plan to make sure that consistency is embedded through the whole document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very thorough. So this is very much a starter for 10 with absolutely no preferred options at this stage, everything to play for. And the other way I like to think of this sort of stage is almost like agreeing the index page for the future plan to make sure that we've got everything covered. So if we expect to see it in the future plan, it ought to be in this draft index now. I think Councillor Mumford, you were first, and I'm going to work clockwise from you.
Do you want me to give a list of points, or do you want each point dealt with as we go round?
Spin a list out, and then if we need to come back to you for detail, we will.
Okay, so this is my overview of the document and the points that I made. In the technical document, you're leaving everything open, so there are no conclusions. There's nothing sort of forcing the answer in a certain direction. So the first question I ask you is, when I look at infrastructure, I find the Leeds-Langley Relief Road mentioned. When I look at landscape, I don't find any mention of the application for the Green Sand Ridge to be an ANOB. Completely missed out of it. So why are we doing that? Wherever I've looked at climate change, it is very poor. And it's in the document a number of times. Yeah, we've got wind farms, we've got solar farms, but we might choose to relax these policies because of our climate change review. But in the document, it shows that we're probably not going to because we're happy the way they are. Residential developments are taking fabric first, have got no renewable policy, something I believe we need. So you're forcing people down in a direction. On the annex, you show the policies that are going to be reviewed. And things like SP17, we're happy with SP17, DM9, DM11, and probably they're not going to get reviewed. Well, they need reviewing. SP17 does offer little protection to our LLVs, and we need to look at it. If you look at DM91, the criteria on DM91 is broken down to 3 or 4 criteria. Either DM9 needs retitling, or it needs to be included in ones like DM11. So it either needs, because we are missing. My point there is that we should not have that traffic light system saying we're not going to review each one of those. We should leave it open. Otherwise, we're driving the answerer down a path of we're not looking at it. And as for the review of the hierarchy on page 93, to me, when I read that, we're going to look at the hierarchy and consider putting in more development so they get the services required. It doesn't take any account of ones that are not in the hierarchy. It does not take into account any erosion of the services that can't be replaced by development. It seems to me that we're going to look at each one and not do it as a total thing. Now, I'm sure we're going to look at it, but that's not the impression the document gives me. And last but not least, I look at the pictures. It's a very serious document. It affects people's quality of life in flooding, development, and all those type of things. I looked at those illustrations, and I think the only thing that's missing is Mr. Tumble and Postman Pat. I thought it was very childlike. That might be just me, yeah? But that was my thought of that. I looked at it and I thought it was not as serious as the subject it was dealing with. They're my points.
That was quite a list. I think Mr. Jarman's keen to respond to one point in particular, and that will give others a moment or two just to compose their responses to you.
Yeah, it's a general point, which hopefully will, I wouldn't say curtail the debate, but provide clarity, more clarity to the debate tonight. As the chairman said, this is very much an index page, or I prefer contents page. But it's up to you what the contents are. It's your document. Sarah and Mark can't just give you a blank sheet of paper. They obviously have to come up with some questions, as David said, as a starter for 10. So I'd suggest, I'm sure, you know, councillors will have various views on whether or not we should be doing, I don't know, for instance, more on employment or perhaps less on employment. But we, at this point in time, we can't nail it. It's up to you, Councillor Munford, and other councillors to come back and say, well, actually, having read the document, I've got strong concerns about it doesn't do enough for the AUNB. I don't like the settlement hierarchy. But so you populate the content of this document. Otherwise, we'll, to be blunt, we'll keep going around in circles.
Well, we could be here all night then. So I'd like to see the inclusion on where you're dealing with landscape, the ANOB on the Green Sand Ridge included. I would like to see that we would be looking at policies on renewables for residential development, even though we have Fabric First. And I would like all the traffic lights taken off of the policies in the technical document, leaving all of them open for review. And I would like the hierarchy on page 93 rewritten in a way that it says we are going to review the dispersal and this hierarchy may not stand.
Right. Now, I think we're achieving exactly what we're supposed to achieve here, which is what Mr. Jarman's saying, is to make this document a member-led document. So we're already into some quite extensive changes potentially. I want to just examine the question of timescale. I could see a situation where we get a lot of issues out this evening and it requires a fairly full document coming back to us before it's approved for consultation. I could see an outcome like that. So I just want to understand the impact upon the timescale if that's the outcome this evening.
Thank you, Councillor. Unexpected turn. So what we are in a position of needing to do is to comply with the requirements for our adopted local development scheme. That document was taken to full council and it contains the detailed timetable, key milestone timetable for the local plan review. That sets out that we will go out to public consultation in July on this document. If we do not do that and it gets delayed into August, what will happen is we will need to redo our local development scheme to reflect the timetable that members subsequently agree for the local plan review. Clearly there is likely to be a knock-on effect though into future consultations and future timeline for the local plan review itself. But it's the local development scheme document which sets out the requirement which we have to meet and we adopted at full council.
Mr. Nash, can you just remind me of the date of our next meeting? It's July the 9th?
Yes.
So that would...
The deadline for reports is Friday, publishing the next one.
Right. So I'm not saying we're going to need to go this route, but I just wanted to establish the timescale parameters. I'm very mindful that we can't allow the progress of this plan making to slip anywhere, and if it does, we've got to pull it back somewhere else because we can't afford the plan to expire and be back to the bad old days of planning by appeal. We've got to get this through and get it through on time.
Sorry, Chairman.
Mr. Jarman?
Perhaps I wasn't clear enough. What I would suggest is that I'm sure councillors, not just on this committee, but other committees, will have a whole host of points they want to make, but that's one of the fundamental points of the consultation. So, Councillor Munford, if you've got a list of whatever 10 questions, please just email them to us or whatever, and we will consider them in the next iteration of the local plan, like we would for any councillor or members of the public or different organisations.
So that's a point well made, that we actually have the whole duration of the consultation period to bring detail in, but maybe there's some big headline items that we do need to, some titles for that contents page, Mr. Jarman. Councillor Mumford, can I move on to some others and I'll give you another
I
go
don't
later?
think that answers what I'm saying. I am not answering the consultation. I am talking about the build-up to each question and what is in there and the way it is taking people forward. If you look at the traffic light system on the policies, it explains that certain ones will be reviewed and others we're comfortable with. I'm saying take that traffic light system off of it. Otherwise, you will not get people to respond about all of the policies in there. I would like to see that we are doing something about the landscape.
Can I pause you there for a
etc.
second and let's just get a response on if there was a mind for this committee to ask for the traffic light system to be removed, is that an achievable, simple thing before we go to consultation as per proposed? Your microphone, please, Councillor Mumford.
This is a very good point. I mean, what we have done with the traffic light system is attempted to provide an idea. We actually use the word signal the scale of change which may be necessary. But I'm not wedded to a traffic light system on this. I can assure members that each policy will be reviewed. It's a future tense. That work hasn't started yet. They all will be reviewed. We again try to signal an idea of which policies are most likely to have more fundamental changes than others. But I'm not wedded to the traffic light system at all. And if it assists, we can very, very easily remove that traffic light system.
Right,
Thank you.
so just looking for some nods around the room, that would be a supported. Okay, right, so we've got that one. I'm very concerned there's others that want to speak as well, but on the other hand, Councillor Mumford's got quite a good list for us to work to. Let's just see what others have got to say, and I'll come back to you maybe, Councillor Mumford. Councillor Garton.
Along the same lines, I think we've got to be mindful of the timeline we are looking at. And this is a consultation document, and I think we should have in this consultation one big box saying, any other comments, do you want to add anything to it? Because I, for one, would like to change some development management rules on page 139 to 141 on this document, or rather not to change it, but add another one into it. Also, I think the site allocations we see currently on page 134 to 138, I also understand that is probably a generic document, because in 2 years' time, when this becomes our new local plan, we have to update that as well. What I'm very much concerned as far as the consultation process is concerned is the timeline. And the time for submission is, I believe, 27th of September, which is a Friday. Now, first of all, it puts our consultation again in the month of August, and this is not the first time that I'm sitting on this committee and say do not hold consultations in August, because we get 0.08% response on it. That happened last year on a consultation, and I would, from that point, I would not mind to have this kicked in a fortnight's tall grass, that we can bring the consultation end date to the mid of October. The least we could do, however, bring it forward from Friday the 27th of September to Monday morning following at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning, because that would give actually the residents an additional weekend to put some bits on paper. And the last September weekend may be a little bit more rainier than the August weekend.
So just to get that wouldn't be too hard to do, to push it through to the Monday and have another effective weekend for the public part of the response, rather than just the professional respondees.
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
I'm mindful of the fact that as officers, we would normally undertake a consultation of this nature over a 6-week period. We've extended that 6-week consultation because we're mindful of the summer holidays to 10 weeks. But on that basis, an extra few days wouldn't be an issue.
Right. Let's move this along. Councillor de Wigenden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Largely, I support this document and its open-ended nature of asking all the questions. I do take Councillor Mumford's points in hand, and of course, on some of the policies, we had extended discussions over the policies, and I know SB17, we debated for quite a long time on whether that worked or we were happy with it. So I think it's a good time to actually have a look and say, how do we think that works? I only have one specific question on here. On Appendix A, we have a list of consultation questions. It's large numbers, 1, 2, 9. And question TQ3 is, do you agree with our housing land supply calculation at this stage? And I don't actually think we should be asking that question, because we have not calculated it. It's been given to us, and I think we don't really want to open that question.
The housing land supply question actually follows on from a table. The table itself isn't just based on the standard methodology which is required for us to comply with by central government. The housing land supply calculation is actually a figure derived from the number of units which we have already delivered as part of our adopted local plan, the number of units which we are proposing to continue to deliver from site allocations, and also windfall allowance and the amount we would have to deliver for the local plan review as well. So it's a combination of quite a significant number of different factors and isn't just about the standard methodology. It's basically saying we have a methodology there for setting out the overall requirement, the gap that needs to be filled by the local plan review, and is that appropriate? I'm happy for that question to be made clearer so that there is no change or suspicion that it is to do with the standard methodology. But yeah, maybe that answers Councillor de Wigandene's question.
To be honest, what I'm saying no. Is there actually any wiggle room around the number?
Say the standard methodology is not up for consideration, but actually this question is not about the standard methodology. It's about a series of factors. It's about a series of factors. Thank you, Councillor English. It's about a series of factors that will influence the components of the housing land supply as we move forward.
I simply don't think...
Councillor Wheeler, I think what you were
page 85.
saying is that the way it is written at the moment, it invites challenge of the standardised piece, and either removing it to some extent or changing the way it sits there. So hold that thought if you would, and we'll carry on round to Councillor Clark, and we're nearly with you, Councillor English, if you want to pick up on these things as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from Councillor Mumford's point, given that the government is committed to being net carbon neutral by 2050, and we're actually going for 2030, the whole aspect of carbon neutrality, which should be completely threaded through this whole document, is broadly the system should act in two ways: to reduce the generation of carbon emissions and to address the impacts of climate change through mitigation.
Could you come a little closer to the microphone, perhaps?
The point about carbon neutrality is really quite insignificant compared to, for instance, as Mr Mumford mentioned, the Leeds-Langley Relief Road. Now, given that that's going to be a major... it's a government initiative that is actually to 2050. We're more aggressive, but it's something, by the time we get to 2045 with this local plan, everyone is going to be impacted by it in a severe way, and I feel that we really haven't made enough of it in this document, if this is an overarching document. With regard to some of the points that are being made about developing later and getting further detail, could we not have this document with several documents underneath it that are referred to, where we can take those bit by bit with members, as opposed to having this that has everything in it that we're trying to sort of work out on the fly? I feel that we could do something where we actually agree this document, we work out where we break out at certain points, we have separate documents for each of those processes, and they can be living documents up to the point at which we sign off the local plan.
I'm not sure how that works to put it out for Regulation 18A consultation.
Well, maybe we bring them back in at that point, but I just feel that at the moment we've got...
But we'd have to have another 18A consultation, and our timescale is just not going to allow that.
I mean, I just think it's jarring when you read the document to see how some things have been sort of nailed down and other things are very, very, very high level. The last point I'll make is with regard to these sites, the housing sites. A number of these sites are listed as complete removed from plan. Now, I know that we're refreshing the local plan, but they are still housing sites that have been in this local plan. If we remove them, does that then affect the overall numbers for the plan? How do we manage those? Because even when they're delivered, I think they should still be part of our local plan. We should just be saying that these sites have now been delivered.
You've got me confused, so I'm going to ask a clever person to answer. Mrs. Lee.
The sites that have been removed are the ones that have actually been built. So there is...
Our local plan.
In terms of, I think I understand the point, in terms of our future supply of housing sites, obviously the ones that have got planning permission but haven't been built yet, yes, they're part of our future supply and they're included in that table we were referring to earlier on page 85. But if it's a site that's been built, it won't have any impact on our future supply. Therefore, it doesn't need to be included in this in the forward-looking local plan review.
Because they simply predate the start date of this proposed local plan.
Could we not just have them in an appendix so that we can see the actual scope of the local plan as it, because when you get to the last review of the local plan, you're going to sort of be reviewing 1,000 houses when the overall local plan delivered X tens of thousands of houses.
I think this is it's a change of thinking that perhaps we all need to embrace. Effectively what the government's pushed us towards now is it's like a rolling local plan. So it isn't so much a plan that kind of starts and finishes and we're reviewing it en bloc. It's more that we continue to review it 5 year on 5 years. So effectively, the matters that have been dealt with and completed and literally built do fall off the end as we look ahead another 5 years.
And 15 years is our minimum period, but we could go further ahead, and that's one of the unanswered questions at the moment.
Just a very quick point. It does illustrate that the table we have produced on page 34 has a series of components, and as Mrs. Lee has said, there's a mindset issue here. I mean, considering Councillor de Wigginton's points around then asking a question around whether the calculation is agreed, I think perhaps in hindsight, in retrospect, maybe that question is one which we do delete, given the nature of the various components we have in that table.
I think on the basis of the nodding straw poll, that's all round supported. Councillor English, I think.
Yes, on that point, you should never ask a question that you really can't do much about in a consultation. General observations. I think it's unfortunate to bring a report which actually is quite important, because how you write a consultation actually very much determines what sort of answers you get. So I think it's unfortunate that in effect, because of the timetable, we can't change very much. On that point, can I ask, there was a briefing, a discussion last week, and a number of points were made about, was it last week or the week before, about some of the questions in this scoping review. Were those comments from that discussion taken up in amending this report, or has it been presented as was before that seminar? And I'll carry on after the quick answer.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor English. Just to say that at the time we provided that presentation, the documents had been provided to councillors and had been published.
So one wonders what the point of the presentation and discussion was, to be honest. Having said that, I would like to follow up what Councillor Mumford was saying. There is a lot, this is a very uneven document. There is a lot in here about infrastructure, there's a lot in here about housing, there's a bit in there about economic development, a bit about roads, very little about dealing with climate change. What is said about the landscape and the environment is basically very defensive. It talks about protecting and conserving. It doesn't say very much about providing any more or enhancing or doing anything better. And local plans, at least when the MPPF was brought in the first place, were supposed to have 3 legs to the tripod. So I have to say, I think it's quite lumpy, uneven. Some of it's extremely good, but it's tilted towards in a direction. There are some terrible documents at the moment. The blue and green infrastructure, it's just not worth the paper it's written on, to be honest. So there is a lot of work to be done on these areas. So what I'm saying is, in general, I endorse the comments that have taken out the traffic lights about the question we just had, removed. But I think to say that we've got to put all those things in the consultation, when based on a consultation document, which is, in my view, one-sided, is a bit unfortunate. So I do think we need to actually say something about at least putting in the AONB and hardening up the wording about climate change, and actually changing the wording into everywhere where it says talks about protecting the natural environment, actually add the word improve or enhance in the relevant sections, because it comes across at the moment as extremely defensive, as if we're not going to do anything more than what we're doing now in all of those areas. Final point, and I did raise this, and I was told it was in the technical questions. Well, I've looked through it and I can't find it. The government, and that may be my fault, the government is very, very much emphasising housing for older people. They've actually been saying, Dennis was at a conference we went to recently, Councillor Round has been involved in this discussion as well, are actually saying that if we do not make adequate provision for the ageing population, there is a danger our local plans and local plan reviews will be found unsound. They've actually been saying that up and down the country in seminar after seminar. And I'm sure it might be in there in a small print. I think it needs to be more of a theme, that we are actually doing something about the ageing population in our planning policies, because it's going to be one of the most pressing issues this country and the rest of the Western world is facing in the next century, let alone the next 15, 20 years. So we have to, I think, put something in about that, harden up the language about climate change and protecting and enhancing the natural environment, and then I think we may be there.
So another one for the contents page. Before you come back, let's see what Councillor Mackay has got to add.
As I understand it, this process is going to take something like 2 years. But the first stage is to go out for consultation, yeah? And that consultation is drafted between pages 142 and 150. Is that correct? A bite-sized introduction. Let's just...
Councillor, thank you very much. You're referring to the summary document. The technical document is Appendix 1, and that's the main consultation document. You're referring to the summary documents.
So, when we ask people, when we go out to consultation to individuals, we will give them the whole thing, not the summary. So, what is the document then on the proposed 151?
One word answer to you, I think, is both will be available. So if somebody's minded to read the whole document, they get the whole schmooze, or they want the summary, they have that. But both are available to everybody to respond to.
Let's get realistic here. I mean, even the bite size, for most people, is quite a substantial document. It looks like it runs to 7 pages. This is not your average tick box, yes, no. So very few people are going to actually read the full technical document. My point is here that the first thing we've got to do, and you've already emphasised it, this has got to go out in July. So we should be focusing on, I would say, the summary and to get the questions right. I 100% agree with Councillor Mumford, Councillor English and all those others that say climate change is hardly mentioned in this. I would also add that, in my opinion, economic development when it talks about economic development, the first thing it talks about is housing. We are obsessed with housing. I personally think we are not being ambitious enough with our economic plans. There are things that I would love to see in Maidstone. And I think they may be pie in the sky, but I think we should add sometimes pie in the sky aspirations. I'm referring here to one thing I do think Maidstone lacks is higher education establishments. And they bring a huge amount to towns. Now, this is a long-term plan. And we should include aspirations within our plans, not just talk about houses. But getting back to the point, the thing that presumably at our next meeting here will be to decide what goes out to the general public, yeah? Which is summarised between 142 and 150.
Well, at the moment, it's tonight's business to decide, unless we do make a decision to play with the timescales. But at the moment, the order of business on the papers is to decide tonight, unless we change that. Can I just bring Mr. Jarman in and then...
Yeah. To make a suggestion, to be candid, Councillor Mackay, I agree with you. I don't think people have got the time, or most people haven't got the time to answer 130 questions. But they probably have got the time to answer the 7 general questions. Yeah. And can I suggest the addition of 2 additional general questions, hopefully to pick up on Councillor's points tonight? There seems to be, most people want something in there about climate change. So can I suggest that's question 8? And question 9 is what I call a free field question, where basically people are asked, do you think that we've got the emphasis wrong, or are there any important gaps that we're missing? Something very, very general. Because I'm just conscious that each councillor, not just of this committee, but this most important committee, will have their own concerns about things, but that will be different. So I think a generalised approach, or the option of a generalised approach, is the way forward.
That makes sense. So back to you very quickly, Mr. McKay.
Just one point. Thank you for agreeing with me. But no, I don't want a general question on climate change. I want climate change to run through, to permeate every issue of this plan. It isn't a yes or no answer.
That isn't what Mr. Jarman was proposing, then?
It was the opposite, because it's a question.
I'm going to come back to Mr. Edgerton now.
I'll ask, if, with your leave, Chairman, for Mrs. Lee just to deal with the issue around climate change as well, in addition to Mr. Jarman's comments. In terms of the wording, we use protect and manage at the moment. I think Councillor English has a very good point. The requirements set out by the government, we have used protect and manage in a fairly generic sense, and maybe what it doesn't do is be specific enough even in respect to the requirements of the government, which the NPPF does use protect and enhance, and I think that that would be something which officers would be happy to take on board if the committee were mindful to do so, and we would edit this document to ensure that that was the case. When it comes to specialist housing and housing for homes for the ageing population, I would refer members to page 100 on the papers. This is the area, just as a matter of fact, which deals with homes for the ageing population, and we ask a question, it's TQ17, which asks how the local plan review can best plan 4 different types of housing which will be needed. I can also assure members that there is a question, and it's question TQ33. Have we identified the extent of potential changes to the adopted local plan correctly? No, my apologies. Wrong question. Let's try another one. Are there any other themes, issues and considerations, it's TQ32, that you believe we should address as part of this local plan review? And maybe what we should be doing as officers is having that question almost at the front to make sure that, picking up on points which have been made by various councillors tonight, having that question at the front, if they don't look at anything else, and we do make the point in the document that we don't expect people to answer all the questions, at least they may well see that one and the 7 which Mr Jarman has referred to. It's just a suggestion for councillors to consider.
It's looking to me like we've got 2 options in front of us. Within the recommendations, we were being asked to give delegated authority to Mr Jarman to finalise this document. Now, personally, I think the scale of the changes that we're actually asking for, it really ought to come back to this committee, is my feel. Now, in terms of workload, if this was going to go out to consultation in a week's time, yeah, very, very promptly, the same amount of work needs to go into the document to get it ready for publication as it would to bring it back to this committee. We've got a close publishing deadline for the next meeting, but there is scope for further urgent update in between then. It might have an impact of up to 2 weeks on going to consultation from what is proposed, but it'd still be within the correct month on our local development framework. So we either are going to tonight say, right, Mr Jarman, I hope you got all of that, sign it off for us, or we're going to ask for that work to be done and it's going to come back to us at the next meeting. And I think we just need to bottom that methodology out. And Councillor English on that point?
I think we made a mistake when we were doing the last local plan that we got, we rushed certain bits and slowed down other bits. This is actually very important, and if you get the consultation wrong, everything falls over. I don't think the changes are massive, but they are important. I think, given there are about 6 or 7 and a lot of amendments of text as you go through, that it should be possible to get it back to committee with the urgent updates, but this is important. We've got to get it right, and I think that for the sake of doing that process and going through it, that it's actually the right thing to do, and it will show the public that we as members and officers have really thought about this consultation and haven't just ticked a box.
Can I take a sounding elsewhere of whether that's what people are thinking? Councillor Clark, 1 sentence answer.
We've got really quite a crowded work programme for July, so I just want to give some context that it may be worth considering whether we can actually have a meeting with all of those items and this coming back. I'm not saying we shouldn't bring it back, but I'm just saying we need to be careful about the amount on that agenda.
I don't think we should shy away from workload, and we can use
totally agree.
Adjourned meetings for the non-time specific stuff if need be, but your point is well made. A sounding from over this side, please. Councillor Garton.
I'm quite happy with Mr Jarman's idea of question 8 and 9. If that has been implemented, being brought back to the committee in 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, I think that would be the ideal solution. We don't have to redraft this whole document. Climate change doesn't have to be in every question. Right. Climate change is something which we will have to address as politicians later on during the next couple of years.
Just after that sounding at the moment, that's another one of if it could come back in a week or so's time. Councillor Wiggenden, last word, and then I'm going to come back to Mr.
I mean, to be honest, I think we're largely in the same place. I think with Mr. Jarman's points, I think it's and what's been taken on board, I thought we were rather there. To be honest, I was leaning towards leaving it with delegated authority to actually finish this off.
That's exactly the sound we wanted. So, officers, what can we do?
I think that if there is the opportunity to deal with this under delegated authority, it would be optimal. The matter of fact is we've just been checking timelines, and the likelihood is that bringing it back to committee would then start the consultation in August. Now, it could be that members prefer to have a shorter consultation period, but to meet the procedural timelines, we wouldn't want to push much beyond the 27th of September. So but that is a decision for members. Our preference would obviously be, given the nature of the comments and the points which I think have received general agreement, that we go with the delegated authority.
Councillor Mrs Gregg, apologies if I overlooked you.
I'm inclined to agree with Mr Edgerton. I think it can be done under delegated authority. We have most of the points here tonight. Is there an argument that says that we could perhaps put it to delegated authority, but maybe go to chair and vice chair first before that? So that all the points, we can ensure that
there was
the
an
points
earlier
that have been
part
made
of me
have
that
been
was going to suggest that,
Yeah.
but I am of the view of, given the scale of these changes, because I think they're significant.
If members,
I don't think
if
that
members
that
feel so
delegated authority
important, you know,
should happen.
they're quite welcome to sort of reiterate those points by emailing her through to either Mr Edgerton. We incorporate those into a document as quickly as possible. That's put through to an updated meeting to myself and Chair, and then we can pass on delegation to Mr Jarman following that.
Councillor Clark.
Would it be possible for the officer to send us an email between now and the end of the week to say all of the points that they believe they've caught from this meeting, and then we can come back on that email, because then we'll be giving our input and making sure everything was caught, and you will then be able to continue from that point.
It's dangerous territory, because decision making at this council is not by email. It's in public meetings here, but to be dogmatic about it, that can be squared by having it under Mr Jarman's delegated authority.
We also don't screw with timelines then either.
May I formally propose then that under Mr Jarman's delegated authority, but subject to the members having the opportunity to respond to that email in the appropriate manner, that we proceed on that basis. Yeah.
Right. A motion has been put to proceed in that manner. It's seconded by Councillor Clark. Those in favour? We'll clarify the wording in a minute. Those against?
You can't vote on something with wording isn't clear.
Abstentions? Right. I believe that what we were voting on there was that under delegated authority that the report would be modified with consultation of all members of this committee via email. Right, so we were all absolutely clear as to what we were there. So what was the outcome of that vote? No, I think it was directly every member contributing directly to Mr. Jarman. Right, okay. So we'll clarify that vote then if that was unclear. Councillor English, was that members directly feeding in their comments or via chair and vice chair?
It was direct, I really, because I think, you know, that doesn't seem necessary with the pressure of time to introduce an additional step.
That's my feeling as well. So your motion is that the communication be directly between the members of this committee and Mr. Jarman's team. Right. So are we all clear? It's delegated authority, consultation with the members of this committee via email. Right. So those in favour, please. Those against? And I believe there are no abstentions, but that is the way we will proceed then. Okay? Officers, do you feel that you've captured all of the nuances that are made?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to understand the position for officers. What we don't want to do is obviously provide an extra layer which is going to cause delay to the process. So the intention of the scheme of delegation for Mr. Jarman was to ensure that we met the July deadline. So the first point I'd like to understand is around how long members will have to provide their views, and on whether or not the expectation is on officers to go back to members with their understanding of members' views, or whether members will be coming back to officers with what they require as views. I think it's probably better for the former to occur. Otherwise, members will have the opportunity. It becomes a little bit of a free-for-all, if you like.
I think you've beautifully summarised why I voted against this way forwards. It's flawed, it doesn't work. But I think to put some reasonableness to it, we would be asking for officers to redraft, circulate it to the committee, allow them at least 48 hours to give observations, and then it gets finalised under Mr. Jarman's delegated authority. Yes? That I think is the reasonable expectation of what has been agreed by this committee, flawed as I think it is. Right. That being the case, we probably need to actually... Councillor Mumford.
Just while the officers are here, and I've been handed a piece of paper, I went to a briefing session on this, so I know the answer. But can the officers tell us what the plan for the parishes training is and the consultation with the parishes?
Yes, certainly. We are in a position where we've taken on board feedback. We have a parish liaison group, and the Kent Association of Local Councils also hold regular meetings with us. We've had specific discussions with the Kent Association of Local Councils, and the agreement we have made is that we will be consulting parishes, or we'll be briefing parishes, should I say, at the very start of the process. We'll be getting all the parishes together, venue to be confirmed, and we'll be giving them a briefing on the entirety of the documents and its scope, so that they are in the best position to go back to the parish councils and to parishioners and let them know what we are proposing and the areas of concern, in particular concern, in respect of the document. That will be taking place, as I say, at the beginning of this consultation. Thank you.
Just to conclude this one, so I think we completely agreed the methodology. Can I just take advice from perhaps our clerk, but whoever, that we've also given sufficient authority for it to be published for consultation, because we've not actually used that wording in anything that we've agreed. We've talked about how it be modified, but I think we probably need to resolve that the modified document be used for public consultation. So if I move that from the chair, seconder, Councillor Wigan, and I think was immediately there, those in favour? 1, 2, 3. Those against? Abstentions? 1 abstention. Right, so that authority is given to proceed with the public consultation.
I'm 1 short.
Councillor English has left the room.
Yeah, I've only got 7, 4, 6 against 1.
The sums don't balance for the vote, so we've only got 7 votes recorded, and there are 8 of us in the room. So if I ask again for the fours, is now unanimous. Right, okay, all right, that's the... Okay, that item is closed. Press ahead or comfort break? Right, we're going to press ahead. Agenda item 17, please, members, to be found at page 157, the matter of the Lewes Neighbourhood Plan. Ms Houghton, can you help us with this one, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Lewes Parish Council have prepared a neighbourhood plan which has been subject to 2 rounds of consultation. Earlier this year, the plan was subject to independent examination, and the next stage in the neighbourhood planning process is local referendum. Throughout the preparation of the neighbourhood plan, we have worked well with the Parish Council, who have incorporated comments the Borough Council has made. The neighbourhood plan was subject to public consultation on the pre-submission version known as Regulation 14 in 2016. The plan was amended before submission in July 2018 and further consultation on that submission version between November and December of last year. The Borough's Council response as the Planning Authority was agreed at SPST Committee in December 2018. The Borough Council, as landowner, objected to the designation of land known as Field to the Rear of Harts Crescent as local green space. Following the examination of the neighbourhood plan, the independent examiner in his report recommended that, subject to modification, the neighbourhood plan proceed to referendum. The examiner has proposed 14 modifications to the neighbourhood plan to ensure the plan meets the basic conditions. This includes the deletion of Field to the Rear of Harts Crescent, McCown Close. The modifications are outlined in the examiner's report, which is a background document to this report. In summary, the modifications do not alter the direction of the neighbourhood plan. In addition, minor factual updates have been agreed with the parish councils and ourselves. These changes are outlined in the report and are non-fundamental changes. In accordance with the agreed neighbourhood planning protocol, it is for this committee to make a decision on whether to accept the examiner's report, including any recommendations, to decline the report, or to accept the report and recommend modifications along with any further modifications it considers necessary. To proceed to referendum, the local planning authority must be satisfied that the neighbourhood plan meets the basic conditions as outlined in Schedule 4B to the Town and Planning Act 1990. It is considered that the neighbourhood plan meets these conditions. This committee asked to agree the modifications set in the examiner's report, agree the minor modifications, and that the Lewes neighbourhood plan proceed to referendum. Following a successful referendum, a report will be presented at this committee with a recommendation that full council make the neighbourhood plan. At this stage, it will then form part of the development plan and be used to consider planning applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I'm very excited about this. Lewes have worked extremely hard, and whilst I agree that the NBC have made suggested modifications, I don't think anything here is a deal breaker, and I think it's a good news story, and I would ask that the report is accepted to enable Lewes to process to referendum.
Councillor Mumford. Councillor English.
Can I just clarify the meaning of paragraph 11.3 in relation to the removal of Field to the Rear of Harts Crescent and McAlpine Close from policy LP5?
Can you give me a page reference? I can't find it on the screen.
Reads, it is worth noting that proposed modification PM10 requires the removal of Field to the Rear of Harts Crescent and McAlpine Close from policy LP5. I'm very concerned about that, especially if it's been removed as a result of the council's representation as a landowner. It seems to be sort of, well, not quite according to strategic planning considerations.
Is anyone able to comment on this?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor English. Yes, we highlighted this one because it is the removal of an allocation within the neighbourhood plan. It's the only allocation that was removed, and so therefore we've indicated that is the case. So we've singled that one out, but there are others which are proposed by the examiner, the 14 which are proposed by the examiner, in addition to those set out in paragraph 1.14. Thank you.
Sorry, you sort of died off towards the end of the sentence. I didn't quite catch the end of the sentence.
So just to repeat, we have received the examiner's report, and the examiner has deleted the allocation. Now, it's been highlighted because it is an allocation. It's the only allocation which was deleted by the examiner. And so we've highlighted that in the report, but there are other ones as well, obviously set out by the examiner. There are 14 overall, and then there are the minor ones which are set out in paragraph 1.14 in addition. Thank you.
This was a, what type of allocation was it? Was it open space, housing, what?
This is a housing allocation, which, sorry, my apologies. This was an open space allocation which was subject to a report which came to this committee, or was considered by this committee as part of an overall report before it went up to examination on the basic conditions. And it is, as Councillor English has alluded to, the site which the council objected to, I believe, in its landowner role.
Can I just clarify this? I'm sorry to belabor this, but I was led to believe, I wasn't on the committee last year, so forgive me if I got this entirely wrong, that this committee did not have an objection to that site, but the council did as a landowner. So can I have some clarification as to what happened?
My recollection is that the report contained reference to the council as landowner and requested this committee to endorse an objection. And we pointed out that that was not in our remit. Constitutionally, we're not capable of that, and referred it to the P&R committee. And I think the chairman of P&R then allowed it go to delegated authority to the director, and it was not heard at P&R.
So in other words, this strategic planning committee did not object to that?
No, we did not object, but there's a Chinese wall between our planning considerations and that of any vested interest the council may have as a landowner. So any further detail, I kind of want to say hopefully we're not privy to.
Well, I have to say, I wasn't on the committee last year, but I have to say I think that's wrong, that we should not have allowed a perfectly sound strategic planning objective to be removed as a result of the council's interest.
We did not place an objection.
No, but we didn't support the parish council either.
I think that would have been equally wrong for us to have a view on property that we owned.
Why would it be wrong? We're the planning of a strategic planning committee. If we think it's right, then regardless of the council's property interest, we should have pursued that line.
We did not object to the policy. In endorsing it to the next stage, I think we did. Councillor Wigan.
Just want to ask a quick question. So we objected on that item, and it's the one item which has been removed. So was it removed by the examiner because he thought we were right, or did the parish give way because we strong-armed them?
I think the examiner will have had their own reasons for the removal. The examiner will have considered all the matters raised, will have taken the evidence in balance, as they were obliged to do. The examiner also raised 13 other modifications as well to the plan, including changes to designations. So, you know, whilst what has happened, we are at the stage now where we are simply asking members to consider the recommendations on page 157. Thank you.
At the risk of belabouring the point, is there anything we can do about this? Because I think this is pretty disgraceful, really. Not on behalf of this committee, but of the council.
With respect, Councillor, I don't think it's a matter for this committee. Councillor Mrs Green.
The Parish Council have discussed this. They are happy for it to come out in order that this is not delayed anymore. I suppose option 2 for you, they were strong-armed into it, but they've decided they can live with it. They want it to go ahead now.
Because Mr Edgerton, you said that the examiner had reasons for this and the examiner took it out. And what I now understand is the parish was encouraged to change their allocation. So what you said to me, Mr Edgerton, was the examiner looked at this and the examiner took it out, and that actually was not what happened because the allocation was changed by the parish council.
When the final decision was sent to Lewes, they at that decided not to challenge and to take it out, but it was the inspector that made the decision.
So I think put another way is they agreed the modification so that the plan would progress.
I want my dissent noted about this because I think this is disgraceful and I think this committee should have acted as a strategic planning committee and not facilitated the council's land holding interest.
I'll equally note my dissent that I believe that's what this committee did by rightfully referring the other matter where it belonged, because it's not a matter in our jurisdiction. So kindly note both dissents, if any. Councillor Mumford.
I think we are where we are. The inspector has taken it out. The parish council has agreed it. We're being asked in this. Well, I'd like to propose that the recommendations given by the officers, I'd like to propose that to go to the vote now.
And I'll second those from the chair. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I do welcome the report. Myself and Councillor Grigg were very much involved in input. I will make one note, which is on page 196, and there was a very controversial cycleway, point 5.18, which was an extension of the KB22 cycleway, which is Cripple Street to Lancet Lane, and I certainly gave feedback that I felt there was a missed opportunity to continue that cycleway into the valley. There is an alternative suggested, but it does take in roadways and it goes back onto the A229. I really hope that this can be. I really hope this can come back at some point in Luz's when they sort of move forward, because I think that it's controversial that that's a cycle that could be made into a cycleway, but it's already being used as a cycleway and it's very narrow, and it is something that can affect residents along a narrow path. But we did try, and some people were
not
for
a
and
matter
some were
for our
against.
consideration this evening.
No, I'm just making the point. Thank you.
The motion is made. Those in favour, please. Those against and abstentions. That's carried. Which takes us to our final agenda item this evening, agenda item 18, Maidstone Integrated Transport Strategy Update. Mrs. Arnold, we are looking for you to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chairman.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
if we could have some attention to the speaker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This report provides an update on progress made to date against all 44 actions within the Maidstone Integrated Transport Strategy. I'm not going to go through any of them in detail, you'll be pleased to know. Many of the actions are ongoing rather than finite, and for many of these, Maidstone's role is one of facilitation rather than actual lead and delivery. However, an appraisal of the risk to delivery of these actions at this current point is provided in the report, with 9% of these currently rated as red. And it is proposed as part of this report that offers focus their efforts on advancing these key actions, specifically H1, which is the targeted implementation of highway improvements at key strategic locations to relieve congestion, and further details of that is contained in Appendix 1. PT1, to provide bus priority measures on strategic routes linking the town centre to residential developments and key local amenities. And PT2, which is to facilitate improvements to bus services to ensure a good frequency of service provided by high-quality buses is provided on all radial routes to the town centre within the Maidstone urban area. As part of the delivery of some of the walking and cycling actions, Appendix 2 contains a route corridor walking and cycling assessment of London Road, which this committee is asked to agree and approve for publication. This committee is also asked to note the progress made to date on the actions within the Maidstone Integrated Transport Strategy, and as outlined earlier, that officers are asked to focus their efforts on advancing the 3 red-rated actions, H1, PT1 and PT2. I'd also ask councillors to note that a report will be brought to this committee in July regarding the delivery of specific projects within the infrastructure delivery plan.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay?
Can I ask which ones? You said you're going to bring forward some plans to the next committee on certain...
Sorry, to be very specific, there is a report coming in July providing an update on every single project contained with the infrastructure delivery plan. There is as part of the commitment we made to this committee and to the examiner in the still examination, we committed to an annual review of the infrastructure delivery plan and the regulation 123. This will be coming as part of our commitment for our annual review to this committee, so you can note what projects in the infrastructure delivery plan have been delivered to date, which ones have required revisions due to the underpinning evidence from the infrastructure providers changing, and any other required amendments that have come to light through our consultation of those key infrastructure deliverers. But this is the ITS which picks up the high-level strategic actions. I just highlight the IDP because they are interrelated, because that provides that level of project detail.
Sorry, I obviously misheard you, because I thought first time around you said you would be bringing forward some of the plans. Okay, I misheard you.
Thank you. Councillor Wigginton?
Thank you. My turn now.
Third one.
I note with relate to electric car charging points, we're looking at expanding these and talking with the concerned providers. How many electric car charging points do we currently have, and what is briefly the plan over the next year or so for the increase in those? I.e., in real numbers, how many do we have, and what do we envisage it being in a year or 18 months?
I don't have the exact figures of how many are in the borough, because not many are in private ownership, etc. But I can come back to you in more details. I haven't got them with me at the moment.
Could you, to the microphone?
Sorry. I haven't got the specific details of exactly how many electric vehicle charging points there are in the borough with me. I'm quite happy to come back to councillors with some of the details. There are also elements that are reported as part of our AMR.
To my shame, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's in 4 of the car parks. The works are currently in place to put in the infrastructure. So part of the parking innovation report that I think Mr. Kitson brought to us, that was something that's going ahead, installing charging points in our pay and display car parks. And it will take the number from something like half a dozen to a couple of dozen. It's that kind of order of magnitude. A first step on a long journey. Councillor English?
Just on that very point of the car parking innovation report, which you recall I did raise, and other people have raised in the past, the question of, as the technology develops, of whether you can have a variable charging regime. I know that some London boroughs have been looking at this, not just for off-street parking, but also in relation to residence parking. This is technology that's developing, but it's something we do need to look at, which relating the parking on and off street to the zero emissions agenda. So I think that hopefully the innovations report is going to reports, because there's going to be more than one, will be bringing that forward.
Perhaps I could answer that, because I believe that the first stage of these charging points is that the charging will be free and you're just paying for the parking. So there's actually an inherent incentive to move in a zero emissions direction.
That's certainly one part of it, of course, but there's various sort of ways of doing this in terms of more polluting and less polluting vehicles, and I'm more looking at incentivising rather than, as you often say, carrots rather than sticks.
Yeah, well, that's the incentive. Free fuel. Is that a further point, Councillor Wigan? Yes, please do.
Just want to comment here on page 245, 1.46 regarding the trains. Did you expect me to talk about the trains? Talking about lobbying government for the rail services, including the restoration direct services to London Bridge and to Cannon Street. Of course, we know that hopefully the Thames Link is actually going to work. Can you not hear me? Sorry. I'm just hoping that the Thameslink service is actually going to run through to London Bridge, and if that actually goes ahead, the idea of a Cannon Street service, which would be additional to that, actually wouldn't be necessary, and therefore, really, I mean, if we're looking at something which is deliverable, is insisting that they go ahead with the Thameslink service that they're talking about, adding an additional Cannon Street service. Probably there isn't the line on the track to actually timescales to actually do that. The real deal is making sure that London Bridge service goes in, and rather muddying the waters by saying, and we want Cannon Street, because you're probably not going to get it.
And that's why you should be the council's rail champion. I said, and that's why Councillor Wigginton should be the council's rail champion. Yeah. Anyway, Mrs. Arnold.
I mean, just picking up on, sorry, make sure I'm speaking in the microphone, just picking up on that, and as we look through this document as well, picking up around the electric vehicle charging points, there is obviously a need to revisit and update some of these actions as we move forward in terms of the local plan review. Things have moved on as well. So this report doesn't propose any changes to the integrated transport strategy. It just provides an update to what the high-level actions currently are, but as part of our local plan review programme, there will be a requirement to revisit actions, revise it, and progress a reviewed strategy in future.
Allied to that, I am reliably informed that there is to be a significant update at the next Joint Transportation Board on the progress of the Maidstone Integrated Transport Package, which is delivery for quite a few of the measures that are contained within this strategy. So, as Mrs. Arnold says, it's an ongoing work, and I recommend you all get your front row seats for the next JTB. Councillor Garton.
Just a point of observation, which we probably can't do anything about it tonight, but it sort of flags up big red warning lights flashing and blinking in front of my eyes. Page 237, it says progress comments, and it relates to target 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it says official data on modal shift will be available through national census data collected every 10 years. The next census year will be 2021. Now, since modal shift is such an important part of our local plan, and we've got to review the local plan by 2021, I think we're leaving it a bit sharp to come up with alternative ideas.
I think that there is a trend to examining GPS data rather than waiting every 10 years for a census. And actually there's massive big data available that it will inform our decision making on a much more interactive basis in the nearer future than that.
On the census, as you will probably be aware, there actually isn't a census as such from now on. Essentially, the Office of National Statistics is just collating data from other data sources. There won't be enumerators going out and doing a census, as used to be the case. There won't be another one. It's just basically data aggregation from other sources.
Big data. Mrs. Arnold.
Thank you. Again, just as a sort of point of clarification, the target and the description in terms of how things are measured are what are outlined as monitoring within the integrated transport strategy. So whilst I completely agree and we do monitor delivery throughout the process, the ITS says that we will have achieved this, and that is the measurement it outlines. So it's not us saying that we don't want to look at it until 2021. That is the benchmark that we had within the integrated transport strategy in terms of monitoring those, I was going to say 6 delivery points, but certainly the top ones. So that's why in the rest of the document you've got a comprehensive update of where we are currently, because we don't want to wait to 2021 to come back and give you details of how we're delivering it. Totally agree in terms of monitoring big data, and we do look at these. And again, the report highlights that annually we also look at many of these elements as part of the annual authority monitoring report. So it's not us saying we won't look at them until 2021, it's just that is the milestone that the ITS says that we will appraise delivery by.
Thank you. In order to conclude this agenda item, members, can I take you to page 235? Firstly, we're asked to note the report. Is it noted? Secondly, we're asked to encourage officers to focus efforts on H1, PT1 and PT2. Is that agreed? Mr Nash wants us to do that properly with the seconder, so I'll move it from the chair. Councillor English was there. Those in favour? Unanimous, therefore agreed. And then finally, and don't overlook this one, but the route corridor walking and cycling assessment A20, we're asked to agree and approve it for publication. I so move from the chair. Councillor Wiggendon had it that time. Those in favour? Unanimous, therefore agreed. And I'm delighted to declare the meeting closed.